All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're at in the world. And hello and welcome to another Altero webinar, this one on how to fortify your business with Azure Active Directory. My name is Andy Serwich, and with me I got a good friend of mine, Paul Schneckenberg. How's it going, Paul?
Hi, Andy. Hello, everyone. Hello from an evening in Australia.
Hey, sounds good. Well, it's morning here on the U.S. East Coast, so I'm working on my first cup of coffee. But we got a lot of great content to talk about today, so that should keep me awake, instead of just the coffee. So I'm looking forward to it. So we got a lot of great content to go through today, so let's jump right into it here. I think we've got our agenda up first. You want to advance the slide there? There we go. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. So I'm kind of going to be officiating the webinar today, and Paul's going to be doing the bulk of the heavy lifting here, and he's going to take you through, a lot of Azure AD stuff. We're going to talk about Azure AD, OAuth apps, Microsoft Cloud App Security, password protection, MFA and PIM, and identity protection and conditional access. Once we get through all of that content, after the end of the webinar, we'll have, after all that content, we'll have a Q&A section. So feel free to use the GoToWebinar Q&A form in your UI there to go ahead and ask a question at any time. If we can address it as we're going through the content organically, we certainly will. But if it's something that we can't get to while we're presenting the content, we'll certainly do our best to get to it at the end of the webinar during the Q&A section itself. So again, don't be afraid to ask your questions. We want to make sure we get all your questions answered. So with that, let's do some quick introductions of myself and Paul. So I guess I'll start. Again, my name is Andy Serwich. I am a enterprise client advisor for Insight Business Solutions. Insight is a cloud service provider here in West Michigan, and we do all things Azure and M365. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the Cloud and Data Center Management competency and a VMware vExpert. And down there near my smiling face, I put my Twitter handle there at @Serwich. Apologies, you're gonna have to spell my last name. But if you have any follow-up questions or you want to contact me after the webinar, you can do so there. And I'll pass it over to Paul to do his introduction.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I've been in IT for 25 years or so. Run my own business here in Australia. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and you have my Twitter handle there, where you can reach me if you have any questions after the webinar.
Sounds good. Now we're just going to do a quick introduction to Altero, who is the sponsor of today's webinar. And I think we've got a slide on that in just a second here. There we go. So Altero Software is a software developer of some pretty amazing and awesome backup software. The company was founded in 2009, and they've got a customer base of 50,000 plus customers, 10,000 plus partners worldwide, including 2,000 plus MSPs. So company's been growing like crazy. Fantastic company, fantastic backup software, and definitely encourage you to check them out if you have a backup need. From there, I think we've got a poll next. So just kind of want to start with a poll as we get into our content. So we're going to start with a quick poll here about OAuth apps in terms of security. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. And just kind of want to get your take on how you feel about OAuth apps in terms of security. The reason we're doing this is just kind of want to get a gauge of where everybody's at. And kind of use that to kind of tailor the conversation we're going to have here in a few minutes. So I guess, Paul, if I'm, just to kind of get your take on it, if you were going to make a prediction as to where people are going to land on this, where do you think most people are going to land?
I think most people haven't even considered OAuth apps as a security risk at all. Yeah. I think it's one that has flown under the radar for most people.
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody sees that OAuth prompt, right? And like you said, people don't think twice about it really, right? So it's going to be interesting to kind of see the responses. So
yeah,
really interested. I'm going to give this just another quick 10 seconds and then share it. It's really kind of lining up essentially where I thought it would and what you said. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out really quick and then share the results here. So like you said, you think most people haven't even given it a thought, and yeah, definitely 50% have said no opinion, right? Some people said they're mostly okay and perfectly safe, should only be used as necessary, and then OAuth apps should never be used. We got 2% there. I think I fall into the camp of the should only be used as necessary, because I always have followed the mantra of, you know, least access necessary, right? Yeah, otherwise this kind of lines up with where I thought people were going to land. Any thoughts on this on your end, Paul?
No, I think that's more or less what I was expecting. It's interesting. It's interesting statistics actually. It'll be interesting. We should have put that in actually. We should have had the same poll at the end of the presentation to see what people think after we talk through what we're going to talk through. So.
That's a good idea. That's true. Might have to do a follow-up poll on email or something. But anyway, definitely. I'm going to go ahead and hide that and let Paul get to the presentation and start talking about OAuth apps. And with that, I'll still be around here kind of watching the Q&A, but I'm going to drop off for now and let Paul do his thing.
Thanks, Andy. So, as Andy mentioned, we'll do this as organically as possible. So if you have questions as we go along, something isn't clear, just pop them into the chat Q&A window. And if they're good questions, Andy will interrupt me and we can deal with it then and there. Otherwise, we'll have time towards the end. So I call this fake OAuth applications. Microsoft has a term for this, which is illicit consent grants. But it's the same thing we're talking about. So basically, we all know on our mobile phones, whether you're on iOS and Android, that you install some app and it asks for some permissions and you say yes to those permissions. And if you don't say yes to those permissions, the application doesn't work, right? So we've sort of trained our users. And of course, in Microsoft 365 and in Azure, Microsoft has a fairly thriving app ecosystem there as well, right? So the way this works and the way attackers use this is they go and create an application, they make it look like a legit app, and then they do some sort of tricking for your end users so that they will install this application. They might send a phishing email, they might send a text message, they might have an ad on a website, any which way that they can trick the user into going, oh yeah, that's right, I need this email hygiene application or something, so I'll give permissions to it. Now as soon as that's happened, right, whatever permissions the application is asking for, the attacker now has those permissions. And even if you use multi-factor authentication, you reset passwords, anything else, that is not going to make a difference at this point, right? And then even if they haven't been granted necessarily the keys to the kingdom, they still have enough permissions to penetrate further into the organization. And this is not a theoretical attack. We're not talking about something that happened once and a few people made a little bit of a fuss about it, and it's not like a theoretical attack. This is real. We've written an article about this on the Altaro blog, so maybe you could pop that in the chat window for people to read there, Andy, if you want to. The reason we are, one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is that the Prime Minister here in Australia stood on stage about 3 months ago now, and he talked about a nation state attacking businesses in Australia very successfully. And they were actually using fake OAuth apps. It was meant to look like MailGuard 365, which is an email hygiene solution here in Australia that's quite popular. Lots of people installed it, and that's how they got their businesses owned. So you may have seen these permission screens. So on the first one here, we are looking at a user permission screen. And we can see this comes from a company called Risky App, which is very useful. So this is obviously a fake app. It's asking for a bunch of permissions, and we can see that this application is unverified. Users can only grant permissions to their own data, right? So as an end user, I can grant access to my OneDrive or my Exchange Online mailbox or some other data that I have access to, but I can't grant permissions to anyone else. whereas an admin can grant permissions to the entire tenant. So this here is an example of a screen for Altaro Office 365 backup, right? And this, if you, it's probably a little bit small for you guys to see on the screen, but this application is literally asking for everything and the kitchen sink, which makes sense because it's an Office 365 backup solution, right? So it will ask for all these permissions. This is a slightly earlier screenshot as well because it doesn't say verified up here. I'll talk about the verification in a minute. So what can we do about this? How can we deal with this risk? Well, the first thing is we need to understand this as us in IT, right? IT professionals, admins, the security folk, if you're big enough to have an actual security team, they will be aware of this. Whether it's high on their radar or not depends on how risky it's been. You need to have some sort of, as part of your security education of your users, particularly now when many people are working from home, you need to have it as part of your awareness for your end users, for them to understand that, hey, this is not just, don't just click to get past the screen. Now, Microsoft has frankly been caught a little bit unawares of this risk, and they have been working hard over the last so many months to come up with solutions for this. So there are some preview features in AAD, in Azure Active Directory, that we're going to look at today. And we can set up policies to limit what permissions end users can consent to. Now, you can then also optionally set up an approval workflow where an end user gets, they go and install a Microsoft 365 app that's going to help them be productive, and it's asking for more permissions than they are allowed to give, to grant permissions to. You can then have an admin be able to okay that in an actual workflow. The other thing you need to do, and this is probably the takeaway, the one takeaway, that when we're finished with this webinar here, if you are an IT pro that have access to your organization's Azure Active Directory, go and look at what applications are already installed, right? Do a bit of an inventory. Now, that is per app in today's world if you don't have Microsoft Cloud App Security. So that's going to take you some time, right? But it's definitely worth finding out what is installed and what's happening there. So a couple more screenshots here before we head into the demo. Now, this is what happens if you have the approval required. So this test app here from, and we can see it's a user request because it's got a username up here rather than approved for your organization. And it's, I'm filling in a reason and then I'm requesting approval. That's then going to be passed on to my administrator. So in previous versions of this, when you don't have the approval workflow configured, what happens basically is that if the application is asking for more permissions than the user is allowed to grant, they literally just get a screen, contact your administrator, but they don't know who that administrator is necessarily. They don't know how to do that. And what happens is that they generally go to the website instead and set up an app or an account if they really want to use this service, right? And that bypasses IT altogether, perhaps, and then that's an even worse situation to be in. So the approval workflow is a good idea. This screen here breaks down a little bit about the information that is on one of these screens. So we can see that the app logo, which is not verified, the app name, which is not verified, but this publisher domain is verified. So the other thing that Microsoft has done, apart from the approval workflow and the ability to limit permissions, is they have started to verify publishers. I saw a figure very recently that they have about 600 publishers verified by now. Now, what that means is that when it says that the publisher is verified, Microsoft has ascertained that the app that you are about to install comes from the publisher that is who they say they are. They have not tested the app itself, so you could still have a malicious app, but it's a lot less likely that an unverified or a verified publisher would publish a malicious app. Then we can see the permissions it's asking for, and if you click one of these chevrons, it's going to break down exactly what that permission means. We got a terms of service and a privacy statement, and you can go to the myapps.microsoft.com link to see what applications you have installed and what permissions they have. So rather than talking to slides, let's do a little bit of a demo. So here I am in Azure Active Directory in my tenant, and I'm going to head down to Enterprise Applications. And then I'm going to look at security and then consent and permissions. I might highlight that so you can see that. And this, we can see the applications that is installed in my tenant here, but if I go to consent and permissions, I will be given this screen. I'll make that move over a little bit and make it a little bit bigger for you guys to see. So at the top, I have my user consent for application. Now, one option is to do not allow user consent at all. That will literally, like, users cannot install any apps whatsoever, no matter what permissions the application is asking for. That's a hammer. A high security environment, obviously, that might be absolutely applicable. I can allow users consent for apps. Now, then that means that they can grant permissions to any app that they have themselves permissions to, right? So whatever permissions they have, they can grant those. This is the default, and this is the risky one. And we can see that, you know, there's a warning down here from Microsoft. The middle option is where I can limit what they can do. I think I'm going to turn off that light behind me. It might be a little bit better. It looks a bit weird having that light hanging behind me. Okay, so now I can say only verified publishers and only selected permissions, right? And then I can pick the permissions that I'm going to classify as low impact. I have to save this first, and then I can go look at my permissions. We'll do that in a second. Down here, we have very similar settings for group owners. So groups can grant permissions to, say, you know, like you have a Microsoft Office 365 group that has a team on top of it, a Microsoft team, and you want to install an app, and the group owner can install that app for that team and give it permissions. Now here is when I'm then going to pick my permissions to say are low impact. Now these are the ones that Microsoft recommends. There's 5 here, so they can see my email address, my profile, they can sign my user in, they have a little bit of offline access to the data that I've given it, and they can sign in and read my user permission, right? Now I could tick these 5 and say yes, add selected permissions, and go with Microsoft's recommendation. These are very limited. Lots of applications are not going to be working with that set of permissions. Or I can say no, I'll add permissions. And when I do, we have a set of APIs that I can pick from. I'm not going to go deep in the demo here. This will definitely depend on your organization and what apps and APIs you actually use. But within each of these different APIs here, I can pick a specific permission, and I can also see that the APIs that my organization is already using. So there's a whole bunch of different ones in here that I could go down and pick specific permissions, and I can even load more applications and eventually build up exactly the permissions that I deem for my organization to be low risk. Does that make sense? So that's the user and consent settings, right? So I'm going to put that back to there. Now let's have a look at the admin consent workflow, which is this other feature. Now all of these, as I mentioned, are in preview, but that's probably going to change pretty quickly because I think Microsoft has worked hard on this for quite some time. So in manage user settings. Now the enterprise application, the first 3 sliders here are actually exactly the same as the ones we saw in the consent and permission first screen here. They've got them in 2 places. I'm not sure why. That's probably part of what they're working through. But here's the admin consent requests, right? Where I can say users can request admin consent to apps they're unable to consent to. And I can pick who is going to be my reviewers. Pick myself here. I'm going to be the reviewer in this organization, and I will receive an email when one of my users asks for permissions that is more than they can grant, and I'm going to get a reminder if I haven't granted the permissions or denied them, and I can set how far the ask is going to last. And I can actually, there's 2 levels here. you can say no to a request, and that will fail that particular request, but the user can ask again, or another user can ask for the same app again, or you can ban the application, which literally means, it's not called ban, but I forgot what the word is, but basically it blocks it forever so that nobody else can ask for that particular application again. And finally, we want to look at, okay, what about the applications that we already have installed, right? So if I go to all applications, and we can see all the applications that are installed here. If I pick, these are the ones that have been granted permissions inside my tenant, and I'm going to go and grab enterprise applications here in Altaro Office 365 backup, and I can look at permissions, right? So this will tell me what permissions this particular application has asked for. And under admin consent, we can see what an admin has granted. And in this case, there is no user consent to this application because it's only an admin consent for that. If I click review permissions here, I can pick from some options here. I want to control access to this application, all the way down to this application is malicious and I'm compromised, right? And I can pick different options. Depending on which one you pick here, you get some more information, you get some links on how to do PowerShell to deal with this, and then remove all users assigned to the application, revoke all permissions granted to the application, revoke refresh tokens for all users, right? So these are my options I have here to deal with a compromise, or a malicious app that I have realized is malicious. So, but it is a per app approach here, step by step. You've got to do it every single every single app by itself.
Hey, Paul, really quick,
Yeah.
I want to jump in here. A lot of great stuff here. We got some good questions coming in from the chat. So first one I wanted to run past you kind of goes around the idea of that publisher verification.
Yep.
That's kind of a two-part question. First, how difficult is it to spoof the publisher source? And then two, how do you know that the domain publisher was verified?
So that is so Microsoft does the verification, right? As I said, this is a new thing that they have introduced, say, I don't know, 6-8 months, something like that. So basically they have verified that when somebody has published an application for multi-tenant use in Azure Active Directory, they have verified that the company behind that application is the company who they say they are, right? They're not pretending to be some other company with a very similar name. So that's how you know the verification. And what was the first part of the question?
Yeah, really kind of like, how difficult is it to spoof the publisher source? I mean, really, I guess what it comes down to is they would have to get around Microsoft's verification process, essentially, which I gotta imagine is not easy.
I think that's the point, right? I think the fact that several businesses, and including high-profile businesses, have been successfully breached by this sort of attack means that Microsoft basically have to clean up their act. I mean, ultimately, if you look at this from a financial or from a market share point of view, Microsoft wants a thriving marketplace for apps, because it's going to make people use Office more, right? It's going to make people use Azure more as well. So they want that, but they don't want it if people keep getting owned by these applications, right?
Right.
And that's no different than the iOS and the Android App Store having to deal with malicious apps in there as well. This is probably a smaller scale, but the risk is much bigger because you have your company data is at risk here, right? Not just somebody installing a malicious app on a single phone somewhere.
Yep. Sounds good. Two other quick questions here, I think. So first one has to do around the admin app review workflow that you showed. When you select the admin or the person that you want to conduct the reviews, are you able to actually select a group as well? Maybe you have a group of admins that are authorized to do that review?
I don't think you can select a group. It's per user, but you can have multiple users, obviously. So you would have to pick them individually, but you can, I mean, in a larger organization, you definitely don't want to land this on one single poor person,
right?
Because this could be a big workload.
Yep. And then last question, somebody was wondering if it's possible to export and import those app security settings?
No, not as far as I know. I
Okay.
mean, it might be programmatically possible. I don't write code. I suppose there are APIs. Yeah, you could probably use the Microsoft Graph API maybe to write these things in and out, but there is no sort of, nicely built for us non-coders buttons to press as far as I know.
Got it. Sounds good. I think that's it for now. I'll let you get on to the next one.
Thanks. And keep the questions coming, guys. Those were good questions. It's always curious to see what people come up with these things. Now, so Microsoft Cloud App Security is a CASB, so a Cloud App Security Broker. Think of this, if you haven't heard of these, think of these as like a firewall in the cloud for the modern world that takes care of your SaaS applications and other things like that, and can work from anywhere. It talks to the APIs of your cloud services. So say somebody's using Salesforce or Dropbox, you can use this tool to monitor their access, no matter even if they're on their unmanaged home computer and accessing it on a home Wi-Fi network, right? That sort of thing. So if you do use Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is the new name since Ignite, you will have the sort of MCAS agent installed on your Windows and Mac computers, and iOS and Android phones as well. It will discover the SaaS applications that your users are using, and then you can look at what SaaS apps are my users using. How risky are those apps? It's got a nice catalog. Unfortunately, I don't have time to demo this today, but there is a nice catalog of over 16,000 different applications that are rated on legal, corporate, hosting, and security features. And that feature alone is going to save poor administrators, time-poor administrators, a lot of time by telling them whether this particular application is a risky one or not. And then you can sanction and unsanction apps for your users, right? We can set up policies for data loss prevention, information protection, risky behavior, threat detection, and we can set policies for privileged OAuth applications. So let's go and have a look at that. So this is the Cloud App Security dashboard. And over here we have the investigate, and I can go and look at my OAuth apps. So unlike the Azure Active Directory, here I've got some nice ways of building a query to find exactly what I'm looking for. I've got some permission levels here, so I can say, show me all the high severity apps that I've got in my environment that have been granted, my medium level and my low severity apps. So I can pick different levels here. Another good one is I can pick the community use. So if an application is common in use across tenants worldwide in Cloud App Security, it's unlikely to be malicious, right? Because lots of people are using it and it would probably have been discovered by now. Whereas if it's a rare application that perhaps is asking for very high permissions, and I can literally build a query looking for specific permissions here, I can obviously say that's of concern, something to deal with. I can pick individual users to look for, can pick individual apps, and I can look at the approved and banned applications I've got in my environment. So again, if we go down to Altaro Office 365 backup here, I can approve that app, or I can ban the application, and I'll get some more information around it here as well. So this, if you have hundreds or thousands of applications to deal with, this is a much better interface to deal with this, and you've got that nice way of just banning an application, right? If you investigate it and see it's no good, you can just ban it. And then we have ability to control this with policies. So we can go over here and create a policy for OAuth apps. And this is the Altaro demo. Again, I can pick the severity on the permissions here. I can pick different threat detections, and then I can build a filter here to, again, on the same things, right? The community use level, the permission levels, it's asking for specific permissions, specific publishers, etc., including users, right? So I can pick the number of users. So an app that a few users are using is one risk, an app that lots of people are using is another risk. And I can then build this policy up with alerts. So I can have an alert in an email or a text message when something happens. I can link this up to Power Automate, which used to be called Flow. So I can build any kind of automation here. And if it's an Office 365 app, I can literally revoke the app, right, built on this policy. So this gives you a much better control over what you can and can't do in a more sort of policy-based fashion rather than one by one, which is what you are stuck with if you don't have cloud app security. Okay.
Hey, Paul, really quick, that brings up a good question that's been asked in the chat here.
Yep.
What licensing level do you need in order to get cloud app security? You need like a Azure AD P1 or P2?
So
you were hoping I wasn't going to ask the licensing question, weren't you?
No, I'm good. I know the answer. So you can actually, cloud app security comes in a few different flavors. So there is an Azure Active Directory version that you get with Azure Active Directory Premium that allows you to discover applications. But it has a lot of other limitations. There is also an Office 365 flavor, which only allows you to build policies and deal with the applications inside of the Microsoft 365 family. Both of those you get with the lower licensing levels. If you want the full cloud app security with all the features and controlling all the applications, including third-party ones, you need Microsoft 365. So not Office 365, but Microsoft 365 E5. So the gold, platinum, diamond-studded version that is eye-wateringly expensive. That's the one you need.
All the bells and whistles there. So
yep.
I appreciate you covering that. I know the licensing stuff is always a tangled web. It's almost like we should have a webinar just on M365 licensing at some point. Just thinking out loud.
Count me out. It's too complicated.
Right.
I'm a technical guy. I can deal with the complexity of technical stuff, but not that sort of stuff. All right, we move on to, so this whole webinar is about Azure Active Directory and what features you've got in there. So we focused on OAuth apps because I have a strong feeling that this is something that people haven't paid a lot of attention to, really. So now we're going to move on to a few different features in Azure Active Directory that also are probably underused. First one is password protection. Now, most organizations that I deal with as an IT consultant, their policies tend to live in the past, right? Most modern attacks, passwords don't matter. Even if you have a good complex password, it doesn't matter. And I've got a nice link at the end of the resource links to a blog post about this. And what do we actually need to do around passwords for as long as they're around? So we want to stop forcing users to change their passwords. This isn't just me. GHCQ in the UK, NIST in the US are saying the same thing. Don't enforce special characters, because when you do, your users are going to put an exclamation mark at the end, or if they're really elite, they'll change an E to a 3 or an A to an at, and they think they're really hackery. And of course, the attackers already know this, so they'll use that. What does work is stopping users using really dumb passwords. Password 1 is 9 characters long, and you can have a capital P and you can have a number 1 at the end, but it is a really terrible password, right? And stop users using that. And we can do that with password protection. Use multi-factor authentication. We'll come back to that later on. If you can, obviously using biometrics and password protection in Azure Active Directory, and you can also extend this to Active Directory on premises. So a quick demo on that. So we're going to head back into Azure Active Directory. And we're going to go down to security, which is here. And we're going to go to authentication methods, which is here. And this is where I can deal with my password protection. So this Microsoft maintains if I have turned on password protection. So if you are in the cloud only, like your users are created in the cloud, then they are already under the spell of Microsoft's 2,000 odd words that they maintain as passwords, but you should add to that list your own custom words that are for your particular area, perhaps a sports team, brand names, things that are custom to your organization. It does fuzzy matching, so you don't need to do Altaro, Altaros, Altaro 1 or anything like that. Just use the names in here, pop them in. You can pop into about up to 1,000 words here. And then you turn this on for your on-premises, and you need to install an agent on a member server in your organization somewhere, and another agent on your domain controllers. This is all documented. It's not hard to do. Your domain controllers do not need outbound or inbound internet access. They can be totally cut off from the internet, but the agent does need, the proxy agent does need connection, and we have instructions in the blog posts that are referenced in the resource section. And you can start off with this in audit mode so that you can see what passwords would have been blocked had your users come up with bad passwords. And then eventually, once you've trained them what an actual non-common password is, you can click on enforced.
Hey, Paul, we got a good question here in regards to the demo you just did. Does this apply to Windows 10 machines on the domain and via the Control-Alt-Delete screen, or is it just for cloud applications?
Nope. This is your password. So if you've got accounts that are on premises in Active Directory that are then synchronized to Azure Active Directory with AAD Connect, this will apply to all of those situations.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
So, poll time.
Yeah, that's me. Let me go get the next poll lined up here. So, again, I think we're swinging back to that MFA discussion, right? And we've got a poll here, just like the OAuth poll. Just kind of wanted to see where everybody's at with MFA today. So again, I kind of have my gut feeling as to where this one's going to end up, but I'm kind of curious to see. I think what I've seen to be the most common, at least in the circles I'm in, is that most organizations are using it either for admins only, or they've identified some certain high-risk users within their organization that they've enabled it for as well. Strangely, I don't see it used, whole hog across an entire organization very often, but that's just kind of the circles I'm in. What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
The same thing, and I will be, while you guys are answering the poll, I'll let you know what the official figures are from Microsoft. About 4.5 years ago, there was a presentation where they told us that 3% of all Office 365 tenants in the world at the time, 3% were using MFA for their administrators, right? Not for their end users, but just for their administrators. They made a hard push, and the figure I heard from last year, probably a bit more than a year ago now, was 8% of all tenants were using MFA for their admins. That means that 92% of all the administrators out there don't even use MFA for their admins, right? Which is really scary.
That's laughingly bad. Only 8%. That's way worse than I would have ever pictured it, right? So
it's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah. With that in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll and share the results, because we must have some of the 8% in the room with us today, because we've got
absolutely.
Yeah, we got 44% say they've got it enabled for everyone, which is fantastic, right? And
that is excellent.
Yeah, and certainly things like conditional access make it easier to roll out to your standard run-of-the-mill end user. I think you're going to get into that a little bit, but we have 24%. We have it enabled for certain users, 20%, and then we got 12% not using it at all. So yeah, kind of the 44% honestly surprises me a little bit. So I'm actually really happy to see that.
Yeah, it really surprises me too. I don't know that we have a statistically significant number of people on the call, and probably the people who sign up for a webinar like this are probably the people who are interested in security. But that's amazing. I can't do it except for via words, but I am handing out a gold star to all of you who are in those percentages where you're using MFA, even if you're only using it for your IT admins. That's really good.
Yep, definitely. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. And Just a quick observation. We've got Gareth in the chat actually made a good point here. You know, all new M365 tenants will be MFA by default. I think that was a recent announcement, wasn't it?
Relatively recent. They changed it from baselines to security defaults, but yes, for your admins, you have it turned on. That's actually a bit of a risky one because there is no way to exclude your break glass accounts. So one of the risks here is that you want to make sure that you have at least one, perhaps two accounts in your tenant that are global admins, excluded from conditional access and excluded from MFA, and they have really long passwords, and they're locked away in a safe somewhere, and they are only to be used when literally MFA is down, right? Or you have, I don't know, all your IT admins are off work and you need to desperately get in. So in emergencies, you need those break glass accounts. But with the security defaults that Microsoft has set up, you can't actually exclude those users. So that's a bit of a bad one. But if you create your own conditional access policy to enforce the same thing, but with exclusions, you're good to go. So Microsoft says that 99.9% of identity-based attacks are stopped by using MFA. And they talk about it, the equivalent of jumping out of a plane without a parachute, right? That's not using MFA. You might be really lucky and land in a haystack and only break your legs, but you know, I wouldn't bet on it. And we can use conditional access policies to enforce MFA. We got some options for MFA verification in Office 365. And of course, where possible, use Windows Hello for Business and or biometrics. So very briefly, we're going to look at the multi-factor settings here. So head back to security, and we're going to go to MFA. And this is our settings for MFA. We can set up what happens when people, you know, fail MFA a couple of times. Do we lock their account out? How do we unblock those users? Are users allowed to report a fraudulent alert? One of the big things with MFA is you've got to teach your users to let you know if they get a prompt when they're not in front of the computer and not using it. If you keep prompting them too often, they're going to start clicking OK on prompts that are not coming from them, and then you've defeated the whole purpose of MFA. Hardware OAuth tokens are in here, setting up notifications so you know when things are going on, and your phone call settings. The MFA server is being retired, and that's all I'm going to show. Yeah, time-wise, no, we're going to move on. But there is an option if you click on this link here, you can go and set up specific locations of public IP addresses where you're not going to be prompted for MFA. So privileged identity managed. So apart from MFA, for your admin users, if you have Azure Active Directory Premium P2, you could use PIM. Basically, what that does is it stops your administrators being permanent administrators. So their accounts become eligible to be an Exchange administrator, a SharePoint administrator, or a global administrator, but they are not that automatically. They're just an ordinary user until they go to the Azure Active Directory portal and they elevate their privileges. They can optionally have to do an MFA. They can optionally have to enter a service ticket number at this point. They can optionally have to be approved by somebody else to do this. And there is sometimes some delay before this actually works. And you want to make sure that you exclude your break glass accounts. Also should not be relying on PIM because PIM might be down. And we got an article on that on the blog. And I'm going to do a super fast demo on that as well. So we're going to go back to here and we're going to go to identity governance. And once that loads, there it is. We're going to go to not entitlement management. We're going to go to privileged identity management, and we have our Azure AD roles. So this is where I would go into a role, and let's say here I can assign eligibility to somebody. So I'm going to add an assignment to Andy once this loads. And we're going to pick, you're going to become a billing administrator, Andy. And I'm going to pick
responsibilities.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Andy here. I'm going to pick Andy as a billing administrator for this tenant, right? And when I have then configured him to be eligible for a limited amount of time, perhaps only a year, he's going to work in our organization, something like that. I assign that to him. He can then go in here and activate that for a limited amount of time, and you get rid of that standing access. Basically, the user is not an administrator permanently, only when they jump through the hoops in PIM to make that happen. So that's that one there, and we get back to the presentation. Identity protection is the usage of machine learning and artificial intelligence to identify risky users in your organization, and that lets you build policies to around users who are risky, right? Their leaked credentials may have been found on the internet somewhere because they used the same username and password on another site somewhere. That site has been compromised, and now the attackers are using that on Office 365. Or this particular sign-in that they are performing is a risky one, right? And again, we can have a policy around that to deal with that. Now, a user risk is going to enforce a password reset, which requires an MFA first. And if it's a risky sign-in that the policy is triggered, we're going to enforce an MFA, right? And say, yep, we're not sure this is you, so you need to go and do an MFA. So we're going to do a demo on this as well. So we are going to go back to Azure Active Directory, and we're going to go to security. We're going to go to identity protection. And this is where I have my user risk policy and my sign-in risk policy. So very briefly, we're going to do a sign-in risk policy. I pick the users this is going to apply to, right? In this case, all users. I can do a sign-in risk here. So I can say only if this sign is deemed high risk. What are we going to do? Well, we are going to allow access but require MFA for this particular risky sign-in, and I can enforce this policy by turning it on and then hitting save. Okay, so sorry about the speedy demos, but that's how it is. Now, due to time, so the big thing here is ransomware attacks. And we call this big game ransomware attacks, meaning that instead of just sending you a phishing email, encrypting whatever files the malware can get to when somebody clicks on the link in the phishing email, there's actually hackers on keyboard breaking into your organization, lurking about, perhaps encrypting or invalidating your backups, exfiltrating your data so that if you choose not to pay, they can then dump that data on the internet to force you more likely to pay, and then they encrypt your data. And because they have researched your organization, they can ask for very big sums of money, right? We're talking millions here, or at least hundreds of thousands, and they know what you're up for paying. And the best protection is a good backup, and that is your cue, Andy.
Yeah, I'm up here. So let me go ahead and move that over here and make myself a presenter. Let's see. And then show my screen. I want monitor 1. And then while I'm working on that, let me turn my webcam back on. That way everybody can see my smiling face. There we go. All right. Able to see my screen there, Paul?
Yes, I am.
Good deal. And then, yeah, while I'm going through this, that should give Paul a chance to kind of go through the Q&A. Again, we got a lot of great questions coming in, so keep them coming, guys. We'll be sure to try and get you an answer there. And let's talk about backup. So again, as Paul mentioned, when you've got a ransomware situation on your hands, and again, people are taking advantage of certain situations in M365 to ransomware your M365 data, which obviously is not a good place for anyone to be in. definitely you want to have kind of a secret weapon in your back pocket to kind of help remediate and deal with that situation, right? So just for demo purposes, while Paul takes a look at the Q&A, I've got Altero Office 365 backup pulled up here. So again, this solution is completely managed from the web. Basically, you just log into manage.altero.com, authenticate, and you pop into this view here. Now, if you're an MSP, you have the ability to manage and take care of multiple customers from this single pane of glass. And then, if you're a standalone organization, you can manage your single M365 tenant or multiple tenants if you have them. If you made an acquisition or something along those lines. So you have the ability to do both from this the single pane of glass. If you want to add an Office 365 organization, you go through this step-by-step process. And again, like Paul showed you earlier with the OAuth apps, you have to go through the authorization process and give the app access to your O365 tenant. Now, the big deal with backup applications is actually doing backup, right? And when you come in here and you add a O365 organization to the backup application, it will parse the tenant. It'll find all the mailboxes and OneDrive accounts and SharePoint files and all that stuff. And when you come in here and actually enable a mailbox to be backed up, you see a lot of the ones in here have already been enabled. It will automatically start backing up that mailbox 4 times a day to cloud managed storage that is managed by Altero. You don't have to worry about providing your own storage for this solution. Now, if you want to take a manual backup, you certainly have the ability to. You can come over here and hit the 3 dots under any mailbox and hit take backup, and it will do a manual backup of that mailbox. And no backup application is good unless you can actually recover from it, right? So doing a restore is very simple and easy to run through. If you're an MSP, you select the customer that you want to recover from. So I'm going to recover from Altero Sales Inc. And what Office 365 organization within that customer do we want to recover from? And my mouse got away from me there. And I'm going to hit next. And then I have to select, what mailbox do I want to recover from? So let's say, Adele came to me and said, hey, I'm missing some emails, or maybe her mailbox got ransomware because she, fell into an OAuth trap that captured her credentials and then ransomware to her mailbox. A lot of different options and variables there. And let's say we need to recover her to the 6th of October. And then we have a couple of options for restoration. We can say restore all emails, calendar items, and contacts to the same mailbox. And what you'll be given the option to restore them to a subfolder within that mailbox. You can go to a different mailbox. So maybe you want to carve off a different mailbox for Adele. That way you have the previous mailbox for investigative purposes or whatever. You can go to a PST file or a zip archive as well. So from there, like I said, you'd be given the option to restore to a subfolder if you selected the same mailbox option, and then I'd hit restore and it would go ahead and conduct that restore operation. So again, this is a very simple, easy to use, and scalable backup solution for M365. Again, does mailboxes, OneDrive, SharePoint, with additional features and functionality coming in the future. So with that, let me hop back to the slide deck. And I know we've got a couple of additional slides to go through here based off of some of the news from Ignite, right, Paul?
Absolutely, yeah. So are you gonna, so you can drive this, hey?
Yep,
so
sure
we've got some renames of security products. So Microsoft 365 Defender is the new name of the advanced threat protection products, and Azure Defender is the new name for the what used to be called Azure Security Center. And so they're standardizing on these names, and they call it, calling instead of endpoint detection and response, it's called extended detection and response, XDR. And if you pop to the next slide for us, conditional access policies can now be treated as code. There's a nice GitHub repo there where they talk about this. You can even do backup and restore for that. We got better insight into your conditional access policies. You can do the conditional access policies and identity protection that we saw earlier, the policies for Azure B2C. So you've got an app that you have people signing into using Azure Active Directory. We can assign global administrators, etc., using groups. rather than individually to people. And we have what's called continuous access evaluation in preview, so that when you force a user to sign off because you have discovered some sort of breach, they normally will have up to an hour of access because the refresh tokens last for an hour. With continuous access evaluation, they will literally be kicked out when you turn off access for them. And if you're using the Azure AD proxy to publish your on-premises applications, you can now use header-based authentication for that. And I think that's it. Then we've got a resource slide here with some links.
Yeah, and just to answer some of the questions we've had about the slide deck, you will get a copy of the slide deck after this webinar. So don't feel like you have to quick write down all these URLs. You will get a copy of the slide deck, so you can just come in here and click them. So a lot of great resources here. A lot of improvements from Ignite. It's always good to see.
Yep. So I'm looking through the questions here. I've answered a couple via text.
Okay. Give you just another minute or two to look through that, and I just want to let everybody know here that if you're interested in taking a look at any of the Altero backup software, you can go ahead and sign up for a 30-day trial at altero.com/MSP solutions if you are an MSP. Otherwise, if you're a standalone organization, just go to altero.com and there is a section to download a trial, if you're a standalone organization as well. You can also contact support at altero.com or sales at altero.com for more information. And we do have live chat support for questions as well. Even if you're not a customer, there's you can get some questions answered there. So yeah, we got the Q&A, and I'm guessing you found a couple of good ones. Seems like there's a lot of good questions coming in, Paul.
Yeah, there's a lot of good questions. We might have to summarize these into a blog post afterwards. We won't have time to cover all of them. Spiros has a good question about if you, in EU countries, you can't use biometrics. I would look into that. Biometrics, as long as we're talking about Windows Hello, for instance, the biometrics never leave the device. You cannot steal somebody's face or their fingerprint using Windows Hello to go to another machine and log in with it. It's not how it works, right? They have thought about that. There's no way of getting it off the secure enclave, or it's not the right word, but the secure location on a Windows 10 machine where it's stored. So that is not a huge deal. Got some good questions with people who have gone. The password protection, Server 2012 and later, you do not need Server 2019.
There's one that kind of stood out to me earlier that I saw, and that was around MFA. And again, licensing question. What level of licensing do you need to get access to MFA? I think the user specifically was asking if you get it with Exchange Online P1, which I don't believe you do.
It has changed. So it used to be that you needed higher licensing, but you don't anymore. As long as you are licensed for Office 365, you can use MFA with Microsoft's free MFA, the Authenticator app.
I think it's when you want to add the additional bells and whistles that conditional access brings. That's when you need higher licenses now, right?
Exactly. That's right. That's exactly it. Good question on whether you can use MFA for on-premises, and the answer is sort of. If you're only on premises, you can't really use MFA because that's what the MFA server was for. But if you are in a hybrid scenario, you're using Azure Active Directory and Active Directory together, yes, you can use MFA on-prem as well. MFA for guest users, that is actually something that has been, Gary is asking, that is actually coming out it's in preview at the moment, and I think it is a good feature so that you can start enforcing your security policies for people you have invited into your tenant. Yes, Altaro Office 365 backup does back up public folders, I think, Andy.
That one I don't recall off the top of my head. We'll follow up separately and get you the answer to that. Working for Insight, I'm not up to date on all of the very latest Altero backup features. I know there's been talk of public folders. I think there may be some limitations though. Like I said, we'll be sure to follow up with them and get them the answer to that.
Did you say there was a link to the blog about configuring the agent for MFA in Azure Active Directory? There is the agent for password protection. That is what we cover in the blog post, not the MFA. Yes, Daniel is asking about what do you have several admins and they have access to lots of different tenants. That is also coming in Azure Lighthouse. So this is where you have the MSP approach with Lighthouse, where you get delegated access into other people's tenants. Altaro Backup does not back up Exchange Online public folders. There you go.
Yep, Rick must be a customer. So.
Okay. So we are running short of time. Do we continue for a few minutes, Andy, or do we wrap up?
I think we can go another minute or two here. And I know there was one question here that kind of stood out to me a little bit, and that was, oh, I lost it here. Where did it go? Hold on. My mouse got away from me again. Yeah, so how can ransomware encrypt a mailbox in O365? So the way I've seen it done is basically a bogus OAuth prompt, which is phishing the end user to capture the end user's credentials, trick them into giving permission, right? And then using those permissions to encrypt the user's mailbox. I don't know if you've seen different vectors of attack than that, Paul, but I know that's how I've seen it used.
Yeah, not on mailboxes. It seems the times that I have seen attacks on Office 365 or ransomware attacks on Office 365 has been around encrypting OneDrive and SharePoint stuff. You know, documents in OneDrive for Business and SharePoint locations. And there are some protections in Office 365 for that, but you know, the attackers are well funded nowadays. It's a big business for them.
I know the instance of that I saw was actually a demo that Kevin Mitnick did, and I think he's got a recording on YouTube about that as well. So yeah, if you just search for Kevin Mitnick YouTube and Office 365 ransomware, you probably find it.
Yeah. Brussels has an excellent question. How secure is Azure AD against attacks? Are there any guarantees that there will be no way for anyone to pull off a Mimikatz tool-like attack against it? So there's a two-part to that. First of all, obviously, Azure Active Directory is a modern authentication based, so we're not going to see a Mimikatz attack where you get past the hash or past the ticket type attacks. However, that's not, there's no guarantees, no 100% guarantees on anything in security. I think it's unlikely, though, to see a widespread attack, simply because Azure Active Directory is the biggest directory in the world at this point, and Microsoft has a lot invested in it. I wish they would keep it up a little bit better. I'm sure everybody experienced the outage last week. That wasn't very pleasant for several hours. I had clients calling me, but I don't think a large-scale security attack is a big vector there. And then I'm going to bounce this one over to you from Trevor, Andy, about how resilient Altaro Backup is against ransomware attacks.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I'm guessing you're probably talking about the O361 or O365 one specifically, and really it all comes down to keeping the backups air gapped, right? You want to keep the backup data as separate from the production data as possible. That way, if the production environment is compromised, the attacker either doesn't know or can't get to the air-gapped backup location. And again, that's another reason why Altaro manages that offsite backup storage for the customer, is to help prevent issues like that, right? So I would say it's well protected, but again, with any solution, it's not 100% guarantee, right? But definitely, I would have no concern storing my data there.
All right.
Yeah, I think we're about 5 minutes over, aren't we? So 6 minutes over. So I suppose we should wrap it up, huh, Paul?
Yes, I think we should.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for your time. Again, I know there's some questions that we didn't get answered, so definitely, like Paul said, we'll have to do a follow-up blog post that contains a list of the Q&A and kind of expands on some of that stuff a little bit as well, where applicable. One other thing that I wanted to mention really quick, if I can get to my next button for the slide here. I want to mention the Backup Bible. Again, this is an ebook that a good buddy of mine, Eric Siren, one of the bloggers over at the Altera Hyper-V blog, has put together. Talks about all things backup and DR, basically, getting started, planning, data risk priorities, recovery objectives. Talks about all kinds of different things. Great piece of content here. You will all be getting a copy of that in your email after this webinar. And other than that, I think that's all I've got. Paul, I want to thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us today. You're always a wealth of information, and great to have you on the webinar here. And I want to thank everybody for attending today. We've got a couple of additional links here that you can use to get in touch with Altero after the webinar if there are follow-up questions. Other than that, yeah, I think we're a wrap. Thanks again, Paul. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the kind words.
What's that?
Thanks for the kind words. People are saying thank you.
Definitely. Anytime, anytime. And again, thanks for everybody for attending, and we'll see you next time for the next Altero sponsored webinar. Have a good one.